My story started in the conference room, not with an introduction, but with metal flying toward my face. I stood at the end of the table, holding Assure's freshly pressed suit on a hanger, still catching my breath from racing back from the dry cleaner. My boss spotted the empty tie clip and his expression changed from fake friendliness to pure anger. Before I could say anything, he threw his keyring at me. It hit my cheekbone hard and clattered across the table as everyone went silent. My face burned with embarrassment in front of the whole team. I tasted something metallic in my mouth and thought, he really just did that over a tie that was never even my responsibility. I caught my reflection in the glass wall, wide eyes, bright red cheek, and whispered to myself that this moment would change everything. I felt the weight of everyone's stares as I bent down to pick up his keys from the floor. My hands shook as I placed them back on the table. Assure just smirked and turned back to his presentation like nothing had happened. The room stayed silent, nobody daring to acknowledge what they had all just witnessed happen right in front of them. I locked myself in the bathroom, gripping the cold sink until my knuckles turned white. The sting on my cheek had become a visible red mark that was starting to swell. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands and took a shaky photo, not really knowing why, but feeling like I needed to. My phone buzzed with an email reminder about a client presentation Assure would later claim as his own work. The unfairness of everything hit me all at once. I studied different angles in the mirror, wondering if the bruise would be obvious to everyone else tomorrow. The fluorescent lights made the mark look even worse than it felt. I touched it gently and winced. Taking one more photo from a clearer angle, I saved both pictures to a private folder. As I stared at that photo, I thought about how if I didn't do something now, he would definitely do something worse later. My reflection looked back at me with scared but determined eyes. The bathroom door handle rattled as someone tried to enter, making me jump and nearly drop my phone onto the tile floor. I marched straight to HR, still shaking, but holding on to the belief that there had to be a process for situations like this. Gemma from HR listened with a tight, careful smile and asked me if I was absolutely sure he meant to throw them at me. She said it like a keyring could somehow accidentally fly across a room at face level. She typed up a summary that made the whole thing sound like a simple misunderstanding about office communication, rather than an actual physical attack. When I asked directly if this would go on his permanent record, she avoided giving me a real answer. Instead, she suggested I should focus on improving my own performance and try not to take things so personally. I felt my stomach drop as I realized she was protecting him, not me. Walking out of her office, I understood that my complaint had died the second it touched her notepad. The hallway felt longer and emptier than before. Her door clicked shut behind me with a finality that made my chest feel tight and heavy with disappointment. Back at my desk, the office felt completely different now. Smaller, colder, and somehow dangerous. My coworker Kayla stopped by to drop off some files and quietly told me I should just let the whole thing go. She glanced nervously toward Assure's closed office door and explained that he was protected by upper management. She hinted that someone else had complained about him once and didn't last long at the company after that, but she wouldn't give me more details in the open office. I noticed how people avoided making eye contact with me, now, like they had already decided it was safer not to be associated with what I had just done. The usual friendly chatter around my cubicle had completely disappeared. Everyone suddenly seemed very busy with their own work. Assure walked past my desk later that afternoon, paused just long enough to look down at me, and whispered that I shouldn't be so dramatic. My skin crawled with the horrible realization that he genuinely believed he was completely untouchable. The office felt colder somehow, like the air conditioning had been turned up several degrees just to freeze me out completely. I sat there rewinding everything in my head, trying to figure out how I had even ended up in this situation. The pattern became crystal clear for the first time. I remembered when he first asked me to pick up his dry cleaning months ago, how I had laughed awkwardly and said that wasn't really part of my job description. He had responded by questioning my team spirit in my next performance review. After that, the personal errands just kept multiplying. Coffee runs for his morning meetings, printing his daughter's school project on company time, booking his personal dentist appointments during my lunch breaks. Everything was always framed as just pitching in to help the team. Each time I pushed back even slightly, he would conveniently forget to include me on important email chains or publicly criticize my work in front of clients. The keys weren't the first time he had thrown something at me, just the first thing that left a mark I could actually prove to others. I remembered him once throwing a folder that had scattered papers everywhere, and another time slamming his coffee mug down so hard it had splashed on my shirt. The next morning, Usher called me into his office for what he described as a quick chat. He offered a casual non-apology, saying he had obviously just been joking around and I had caught the keys at a weird angle. He spoke like my face had somehow jumped in front of his throw on purpose. Then he made it very clear that if I kept making unnecessary drama about small things, he would have to seriously reevaluate whether I was truly a good fit for the team culture. He ended the conversation by dumping a massive client presentation workload on me with an extremely fake-friendly tone, asking if I could handle it since I was his secret weapon. I nodded silently and gathered up the thick stack of folders. Walking out of his office with my arms full of his work, I had a new understanding of the situation. He genuinely believed I was completely cornered with no way out. That realization made something shift inside me from fear to cold determination. His office door closed behind me with a soft click that somehow sounded like a challenge I was finally ready to accept and win. At home that night, I sat alone on my couch in the dark, staring at the bruise that had now turned a faint purple color. I opened my phone and compared the photo from earlier to how it looked now in my bathroom mirror. Instead of seeing it as something shameful to hide, I started viewing it as solid evidence. I scrolled back through months of old text messages and work emails and suddenly realized I had been sitting on a mountain of proof this entire time. Late-night demands sent through our company messaging system, inappropriate jokes that made me uncomfortable, clear messages asking me to run his personal errands during work hours. It was all documented. I felt something inside me shift from complete helplessness to something much colder and quieter. This was no longer about fear. This was about strategy. I opened my laptop and created a new folder labeled simply as insurance. Then started dragging the first batch of emails and screenshots into it, one by one. The blue progress bar filled slowly as files transferred, and I felt my confidence growing with each successful save to the folder. Over the following week, I became extremely aware of every single thing Usher did and said. Every time he assigned me tasks that had nothing to do with my actual job, I made sure to confirm all the specific details through email. I would write things like asking him to confirm that he wanted me to leave my current campaign work to pick up his dry cleaning before 3 p.m. He always replied quickly without thinking twice, giving me the exact written trail I desperately needed. I started taking detailed notes immediately after every interaction we had, carefully writing down dates, exact times, and the names of anyone who had witnessed what happened. At first it felt slightly paranoid and obsessive, like I was going crazy, but then I noticed how easily his cruelty and abuse fit into simple bullet points when I organized them. The chapter of documentation grew thicker each day. I realized with absolute clarity that I wasn't overreacting to normal workplace stress. I was methodically building an unshakable record of everything. My notebook pages filled with his words, his actions, his patterns of behavior that painted an undeniable picture of systematic abuse and manipulation. One evening, I was working late at my desk to finish the massive client presentation Usher would be presenting as his own work the next morning. Reed from the IT department walked past and casually mentioned that he had seen the security footage of what had happened in the conference room while he was checking on a camera glitch. He said it had looked pretty bad from what he could see on the screen. I completely froze in my chair, suddenly realizing for the first time that there might actually be video proof of the key-throwing incident. My heart started racing as I carefully asked him if the security cameras also recorded audio along with video. He shook his head and explained that they only captured visual footage, but he emphasized that the visual alone was extremely clear and obvious. He glanced around the empty office to make sure no one else was nearby. Then Reed said quietly that if I ever wanted to actually see the footage for myself, he could probably help me access it somehow. My heart kicked into complete overdrive as I tried to keep my voice steady while thanking him. The possibility of having actual video evidence changed everything, transforming my word against his into something concrete and impossible to deny or dismiss. In a quiet back office away from the main floor, Reed pulled up the security footage on his computer screen. I watched myself on the monitor, walking into the conference room with the suit on a hanger, and saw Asher's face twist with sudden anger. I could see the sharp motion of his arm, the arc of the keys flying through the air, and my visible flinch as they made contact with my cheek. Then the footage showed something that made my stomach turn. Asher laughing about it afterward with another manager, actually miming the throwing motion again, like it was some funny joke. Seeing it from this outside angle made it so much worse than I had remembered, because now I could clearly see how deliberate and intentional the whole thing looked. There was no way anyone could call this an accident. Reed helped me copy the footage onto a small flash drive while my hands trembled with adrenaline. I carefully slid it into my jacket pocket, thinking about how Asher had absolutely no idea that I now owned this moment completely. The small drive felt heavy with power, like it weighed far more than its actual physical weight suggested it should in my pocket. Armed with the video evidence, I went back to HR the next day, hoping desperately that this time they would have no choice but to take my complaints seriously. Gemma watched the entire video clip with a completely blank expression on her face, then let out a heavy sigh. She said that, while it looked bad, things often look worse out of their proper context. She gently suggested that pursuing this through formal channels could seriously disrupt team cohesion and workplace morale. Then she hinted pretty clearly that complaints like mine sometimes end up reflecting poorly on my own ability to adapt to the company culture and work well with leadership. In that exact moment, I finally realized with perfect clarity that HR wasn't some neutral third party trying to help me. They existed as a shield to protect managers like Asher from people like me. I walked out of her office with the flash drive still safe in my bag, thinking that HR was definitely not the answer. I needed to go higher up the chain of command, to people who actually had real power. Her careful words and dismissive tone told me everything I needed to know about where her true loyalties actually lay in this situation. Later that same week, I found Kayla in the break room with red, puffy eyes and shaking hands as she clutched her coffee mug tightly. She finally admitted to me that Asher had once made cruel jokes about her weight during an important client lunch, then turned around and criticized her in her performance review for being overly emotional and unprofessional. Another coworker I barely knew quietly joined our conversation and shared her own story about being pressured to attend late-night drinks at bars that she definitely didn't want to go to. Both of their voices were low and scared and completely worn down from months of this treatment. The break room felt heavy with years of silent suffering. I took a deep breath and asked them both if they would be willing to put their experiences in writing if I had a real way to make all of this stop for everyone. They both looked at me like I had just opened a window in a room that had been sealed shut for years. Kayla nodded slowly, then reached out and squeezed my hand. The simple gesture of solidarity made my eyes sting with unexpected tears that I had to blink away before they could fall down my cheeks. I started connecting all the dots between Asher's abuse and the company's biggest client account, a tech startup whose projects I had been practically running behind the scenes for months. I dug through old presentation decks and calendar invites and slowly realized that most of their successful marketing campaigns had my fingerprints all over them, even though my name had never appeared on a single slide. I found an old email where the main client contact, Sandra, had written directly to me saying that I had personally saved their product launch from disaster. Asher had immediately replied to everyone on the chain to take full credit for the success. I stared at that email thread for a long time, feeling anger build in my chest. The company kept Assure around and protected him from consequences, specifically because they believed he was managing this crucial client relationship. But the truth was that they were only keeping him because of all my work behind the scenes. He was protected by success that wasn't even his. The realization hit me hard. His entire position and reputation were built on a foundation of lies and stolen credit that I could prove with documentation. That night at home, I spread absolutely everything out across my dining room table like pieces of a puzzle. Printed emails, phone screenshots, handwritten notes with exact timestamps, signed statements from Kayla and the other coworker, plus several clear still images from the security footage. I organized all of it into clear sections with labels: ongoing abuse, retaliation patterns, unethical demands, and the key throwing incident as the undeniable centerpiece of everything. As I built the document page by page, my fear gradually drained away and got replaced by a quiet but powerful sense of control over my own situation. This wasn't just complaining anymore. This was building a legal case that nobody could ignore or explain away. I opened a new email draft and carefully wrote out the subject line, reading it over several times before I felt satisfied. It said, "Urgent, pattern of misconduct by senior manager, evidence attached." The recipient line was addressed directly to the CEO and several board members, completely bypassing HR and Assure's protective network. My finger hovered over the attachment button as I selected all 23 pages of documentation and clicked to add them to the message. The next morning, I woke up a full hour before my alarm went off with my heart already pounding hard in my chest. I opened my laptop and reread the email draft at least 12 times, my hands hovering nervously over the trackpad. I thought about my rent payment, my health insurance, and what would happen to my entire life if this plan backfired completely and I lost everything. Then I forced myself to think about Assure's keys slamming into my face and the way absolutely everyone in that conference room had just looked away and pretended nothing had happened. My hands suddenly stopped shaking completely. I moved the cursor over the send button and clicked it firmly. The email made that familiar whooshing sound as it left my outbox. I sat there in the sudden silence, becoming very aware that there was no undo button for what I had just done. Not for him, and definitely not for me either. Whatever happened next would change everything permanently for both of us. I closed my laptop slowly and realized my hands had finally stopped shaking for the first time in days, replaced by an unexpected feeling of calm determination. By the middle of the morning, the usual office atmosphere shifted into something sharp and obviously nervous. Assure suddenly disappeared into a closed-door meeting with the CEO that went on for hours, and anxious whispers started spreading through all the cubicles. My email inbox pinged with a new calendar invite labeled as a confidential discussion with the CEO and the legal department, marked as urgent. My stomach twisted into knots, but I reminded myself of one crucial fact. They had called me into a meeting, not building security. That had to mean something positive. I stood outside the glass-walled conference room during my lunch break, watching Assure gesturing wildly inside while the CEO sat perfectly still with crossed arms. I could see the panic and desperation on Assure's face, even through the tinted glass. For the first time since I had started working here, he looked like the one who was genuinely scared about what was coming next. The power balance had finally shifted in a direction I never thought possible. Other employees walked past me, trying not to stare too obviously at the scene unfolding behind the glass walls of the executive conference room. Inside the meeting room, the CEO and a serious-looking corporate lawyer sat across the table from me, both wearing carefully neutral expressions. They asked me to walk them through absolutely everything in chronological order, starting from the personal errands, moving through the key-throwing incident, and ending with HR's complete refusal to take any real action. My thick evidence packet sat on the table between us, impossible to ignore or dismiss. They confirmed that they had already reached out to Sandra, our main client contact, and learned that she had been relying entirely on me for months, not Assure at all. The whole tone of the meeting made it clear that they weren't looking for reasons to dismiss me from the company. Instead, They were carefully calculating legal risk and potential damage to the company's reputation. The meeting ended when the CEO looked directly at me and stated firmly that they would be taking immediate action starting today. Then he added something that made my heart skip. He said I should know that I was a highly valuable part of this company. It was the first clear hint of a genuine power shift. The lawyer made notes on her tablet the entire time, nodding along as I spoke and occasionally asking clarifying questions about specific dates. Later that same afternoon, I got pulled into another unexpected meeting, this time with Gemma from HR and a different senior executive I had never met before. They presented what they called a resolution offer, a modest salary increase, a formal written apology from Assure on company letterhead, and a request that I sign a non-disclosure agreement about the entire incident. In other words, they were offering me hush money to make this go away quietly. They carefully framed it as protecting everyone's privacy and allowing the company to move forward. But I could hear the real subtext loud and clear underneath their professional language. They were more worried about this story getting out than they were about actually fixing the problem. I politely asked if I could take the document home with me to review it carefully before making any decisions. They agreed reluctantly and watched me leave with the papers. Walking back to my desk, I thought about how badly they wanted this buried and realized that desperation was actually a form of power I could use. Now I knew exactly how valuable my silence was to them. The papers felt significant in my hands, like they represented far more than just a simple employment agreement or standard legal document from corporate. That evening, Reed sent me a message saying that Assure had been scrambling all day, sending panicked emails to other managers and trying to build some kind of defense. Assure was apparently claiming that I was unstable and had misinterpreted everything as part of some personal vendetta against him. He was desperately trying to create a counter-narrative before the board made any final decisions. At almost the same time, my phone rang with a call from Sandra, the client contact. She was absolutely furious that she had been kept completely in the dark about Assure's behavior and insisted firmly that her company would not continue partnering with anyone who protected workplace abusers. I felt the power dynamic shift even further in my favor. I wasn't the person on trial here anymore. Assure was. That night, I forwarded Sandra's strongly worded email of support directly to the CEO with just one brief sentence. I thought you would want to see this immediately. It felt like dropping the final piece of evidence that would make my case completely unshakable and impossible to ignore. Her words carried weight because she represented millions of dollars in annual revenue that the company could not afford to lose under any circumstances whatsoever. The board scheduled an emergency session with outside legal counsel present to review everything. Assure got summoned into a conference room on the executive floor, while the rest of us pretended to work normally but secretly listened for any raised voices. Reports from people who were closer to the executive offices pieced together what happened for me later. Assure had denied everything at first, then minimized the incidents, then tried to blame general office culture, and finally attempted to drag other managers down with him to share responsibility. But the security footage, the documented email trail, and Sandra's threat to pull her business created a stack of evidence too high for anyone to ignore or explain away. Word started spreading through quiet whispers that building security had been called to the executive floor. People began drifting toward the hallways, pretending they just happened to need something from that direction. The tension in the office was thick enough to cut with a knife as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Phones buzzed constantly with speculation and updates as the news spread through the building floor by floor like wildfire. Nobody could contain or control. Then came the moment I hadn't even known I desperately needed to see. Assure being escorted out of the office building by security in front of absolutely everyone. His face was completely pale, his jaw was clenched tight, and his eyes flickered toward me for just one brief second. I think he was searching for pity. Or maybe hoping for some kind of lifeline from me. I gave him absolutely neither. Behind him, Gemma from HR looked visibly rattled and shaken, having apparently been officially reprimanded for mishandling multiple complaints over several months. The company sent out an all-staff email later that afternoon announcing a major restructuring of the HR department and the implementation of new policies for reporting misconduct. After the crowd cleared, the CEO personally called me into his private office and closed the door behind us. He sat down across from me and said directly that the leadership team would really like to have a serious conversation about my future here at the company. His tone had completely changed from every previous interaction we'd had. The conversation took an unexpected turn that worked entirely in my favor. They offered me an immediate promotion, a significant salary increase, and a new role where my name would finally appear on all the work I had actually been doing for months. They talked about my leadership potential and correcting previous oversights, like the whole situation had been some innocent misunderstanding instead of a deliberate cover-up. I accepted their offer, but only on my specific terms. I insisted on getting written commitments about new reporting procedures and real protections for other employees who might come forward with complaints in the future. I also very quietly kept backup copies of absolutely everything, including the non-disclosure agreement they had tried to push on me earlier. Nothing was going into any shredder or getting deleted from any server. After the meeting ended and I returned to my desk, I created one more folder on my personal external hard drive and labeled it simply as contingency, because I had learned the hard way never to trust any system blindly again. Outside of the company walls, I decided to make one final move to protect other potential victims. Using a completely generic email account that couldn't be traced back to me, I sent a carefully redacted version of my evidence packet to a small network of industry recruiters and a professional forum that quietly tracked problematic managers across companies. It showed the clear pattern of behavior without exposing any confidential company data or violating any laws. It wasn't illegal, and it definitely wasn't slander, because everything was fully documented and true. I was simply making sure the truth followed him wherever he tried to go next. A few weeks later, I heard through various professional connections that Osher had been rejected from 3 different job opportunities after his references mysteriously didn't check out the way he had expected. One afternoon, I was scrolling through my professional network updates and noticed that Osher's profile had been completely deactivated. I realized that his old confidence and his entire carefully built reputation now had absolutely nowhere left to exist or hide. That felt like its own form of justice. In the months that followed, my daily work life felt almost eerily different from everything I had known before. My new team actually respected my boundaries as a normal part of working together. Nobody asked me to run personal errands or pick up their dry cleaning ever again. Sandra specifically requested me by name for every single project her company worked on and insisted that I present my work directly alongside the senior leadership team. Some mornings, I still felt strange echoes of that bruise on my cheekbone, like a ghost of the pain. But now it served as a reminder of the exact moment when everything had finally turned around for me. One evening, I got a pointless email request that would have required me to work until midnight for no good reason. I looked at it for a moment, then simply declined and wrote a polite but firm boundary-setting response. I shut my laptop at exactly 6 o'clock and chose myself and my own well-being over the job for the very first time in my career. It felt incredible and terrifying and absolutely right. The final scene brought everything full circle in the most unexpected way. I ran into Osher completely by chance in a grocery store parking lot on a random Saturday afternoon. He was wearing an ill-fitting suit that looked cheap, awkwardly juggling a stack of printed resumes and a to-go coffee cup, and he looked so much older and smaller than I remembered. He spotted me walking toward my car and froze, his expression shifting through about 5 different emotions in 2 seconds. He opened his mouth and started to say my name, maybe to apologize, or maybe to beg for some kind of help with job connections. I stopped walking, looked him directly in the eye without any fear at all, and said simply and clearly that I didn't have anything else for him. Then I walked past him toward my car without looking back even once. As I drove away from that parking lot, I caught my own reflection in the rearview mirror. My expression was steady and completely unflinching. I thought about how there was a time when I used to run his errands and organize his whole life for him. Now I didn't even slow down long enough to hear his story or his excuses.